from that fire in Midrand. Now, preparations are well underway for the arrival of 49 political activists who died in Zambia and Zimbabwe. The remains will land at the Waterkloof Air Force Base, where they will be received by the families and various government officials who were part of that planning process. During the 2020 State of the Nation address, President Cyril Ramaphosa announced the Exile Repatriation Program, which aims to honor war veterans who fought for the country's freedom. Vuyo, Mvoko and Ziyanda Ngcobo are at Waterkloof. Now, Vuyo, the TRC unit at the Department of Justice has played a pivotal role in this repatriation process, especially with liaising with the families of those who will be brought back into the country.
Indeed, Katlego, they have been spending years, literally, since that 2020 announcement you mentioned by the president that this process is going to unfold. Of course, before the president made that announcement, there was a lot of agitation from liberation heroes themselves, people who knew of their comrades from across the broad mass liberation movement who had died in exile and whose families wanted them to come back home. The state, of course, did listen, and that process started unfolding. And Tabelo Mokushane has been part of this process since then, and he joins us now just to take us back to where it all started, following, of course, that announcement by President in 2020. You guys have had to go to countries across the continent to begin negotiations. Just briefly take us through what had to happen even before you could start moving. In other words, dispatch teams to these countries to begin to find these graves and then eventually bring them home, as is going to be the case today. Just a little bit of what you had to do initially as you engage these governments.
Well, Vuyo, for us to be here, a lot had to be done. It all started with the exhumation, handover and reburial of the exhumed remains of deceased victims who died during the liberation era, 1960 to 1994, which was the TRC mandate period. You would remember the TRC had recommended that a form of symbolic reparation should be fulfilled. So exhuming, handing over, and then reburying these remains is fulfilling that TRC recommendation, symbolic burial. Over the years, since 2007, we have, together with the Missing Persons Task Team, that is doing the actual work of investigating where the deceased are buried, either secretly or otherwise, exhume their remains, and then positively identify them. We have been doing that work since 2007 to date, and inside the country, we have exhumed 180 remains. That number also includes those who were judicially executed for politically related offenses on the gallows. Now, to be where we are today, I also need to indicate that the process of developing the appropriate policy that is enabling us today to do what we are doing was only the process of drafting started in 2015. It's a while ago, and then it was subsequently finalized and approved by Cabinet 2021. Then there was COVID. Here we are today. Now, as we were doing all this work of exhuming over the years, families that are affected by the disappearances of their loved ones internally and those who died exiles started approaching us, on a case-by-case basis to say we have our people in Angola, Tanzania, Botswana, Lusaka, everywhere they are all over. And then it was difficult to respond immediately to each and every individual case until that time when the president finally made that speech that the remains of Dumanogwe, Florence Moposho, Basil February be exhumed and repatriated back home. That's when now we decided, let us therefore do country-to-country approach. That is why we started also in Zimbabwe, Harare, Bulawayo, and then Zambia, Lusaka, and Livingstone. Because it's not only these three giants who are laying there, we also have many others who are in this country. That is why today we are witnessing the arrival of the remains of those who died in Zambia and Zimbabwe. 42 of them, their remains have been positively identified. Confirmation will be made to their exact identity, but they are landing today. That's why we are here.
We are going to talk a bit about today, but just to go back, I believe you received a list of what, more than 150 or 160 initially, before, of course, you had to settle on the 49. How difficult was it to try and locate all these people? And what happened to the other 100 or so that you could not really locate from the list you were initially given?
Okay. We have documented and undocumented missing and dead people. Firstly, in respect of the TRC, we have 477 people who were declared missing and reported missing to the TRC. That does not necessarily mean that the list is final. It means we have many more others, because when we exhume others who are listed in the TRC report, we also find out that some of them are buried together with those who were not reported to the TRC. Same applies in this case in particular, in this one, on this exile repatriation project. We have between 1,000 and 1,500 cases of South African exiles who died, in foreign country. So now we had to start somewhere. That's why we decided that on the basis of country-to-country approach, let us therefore do Zambia and Zimbabwe. But it's also important to indicate that here it is interdepartmental operation. We are having Department of Sport, Arts and Culture leading the process, supported by the Department of Defense and Military Veterans, strengthened by the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development. And from the Justice Department, I have been roped in to assist with family liaison and mobilization. Remember, Vuyo, this speaks to the heart of the families, right inside them. It speaks to them. For the families, this has been a very emotionally spiced journey. Emotional, they carry the burden of yearning for closure all these years. It is 1 or 2 or 3 steps enabling families to begin to find healing and closure. And how would they find healing and closure if they are not yet reconciled with their loved ones who died in exile? So today it's a very historic chapter in the lives of these families, also an emotional one.
Let's leave it there for now. And Tepelo is indeed correct to the extent that, Katleho, over the past few days when we've been talking to families, they have heard only good things about this process, how it has been well managed, the maximum cooperation they have received from the state. Only this morning I got 2 messages from people we've been trying to arrange to speak to throughout the day who only had good things to say about this process, but perhaps more importantly about just how proud and how excited they are that finally the remains of their loved ones are being brought back, and they will be buried where their loved ones think they will be at peace at. And of course, the Deputy President saying yesterday that this is only the beginning. In other words, Zimbabwe and Zambia are only the first 2 countries. Next, they are going to identify another group of companies. But of course, they were also pointing out to the fact that there are difficulties in other countries, like Angola, for example, where it's more difficult to identify the graves or to even find these people. Some of them were buried without any signs, without any graves, even just a shallow little grave where they are left there for a whole range of reasons. But someone who's going to speak to the experiences of some of the families who have been part of this process is, of course, my colleague Ziyanda Ngcobo, who is on the other side of where I am, right next to where the ceremony that is expected, or that we expect to kick off in about 2 hours' time, is going to be conducted. Ziyanda?
Thanks, Davi, indeed. And I'm going to be joined by Todd Matshikiza's family. Now, he's someone who in 1952 was one of the first writers of the Drum magazine, but also using his music, he was a musical composer, to actually communicate the message of liberation heroes and how he longed to come back home as he went into exile in Zambia. In fact, at some stage working for the Zambian Information Services, and also in the musical world of Vuyo, someone who was pivotal in composing some of those songs on King Kong. I've got two of Todd Matshikiza's daughters with me, Marian Matshikiza and Mamnombini Kambule. Let's just start off with how you feel. Your father passed away in the 1970s in Zambia, and it's only now in 2024 that his remains will be coming back home.
Indeed. He passed away in Lusaka in 1968. That was the last time I saw him. It's obviously an amazing feeling to be here today. First of all, I'd like to thank the South African government. I'd like to thank the different departments, the Missing Persons Task Team for all the amazing work that they put into this. My father never really felt at home outside his country, even though he was a very sociable, outgoing person. But the roots, the core of his creativity remained in South Africa. And he'd always wanted to come back. That has also been the dream of our family, for him to be returned. And so this is really a very important occasion for us.
Let's bring in Mamnombile Kambule. As the eldest daughter, just talk to us firstly about what kind of man your father was, using his art, his writing, his musical compositions to communicate the message of the struggle, but also what kind of father was he, especially as being one of the eldest daughters?
Let me correct eldest daughter. The eldest daughter was my late sister Roundy, who passed on in April this year. I'm very emotional, okay? You know, am I allowed to say I represent the countless children who lost their fathers, mothers, siblings, role models in exile. And I also, like my sister, I'd like to thank the South African government because this today gives us closure. You know, this was a dynamic guy. We grew up, I know of my father. We grew up playing his music. And am I allowed to sing King Kong? King is the lion. King Kong. King is the Lord. King Kong. King is coming. Coming until King Kong. Todd has come back to South Africa. Thank you to the government of South Africa. Thank you.
And maybe just again, Marian, when was the last time you saw him? You did say that was
1968. And just to complete the question that you asked my sister, he's mostly known for the music of King Kong, the musical, for which he wrote all of the music and some of the lyrics, particularly in indigenous languages. But he's less known for the work he did on Drum magazine, where he reported on social, cultural, and also political issues. He continued his work on Drum from London, so sending articles to the office in Johannesburg. And apart from that, he wrote several articles as an independent writer. One in particular stands out where he points out the power of protest music, traditional protest music in South Africa. His autobiography, Chocolates for My Wife, which he wrote in Zambia, was banned by the then South African government. Not political in essence, but because it quietly criticized, the regime. And that is why Dad pined after his country. So yes, again, we're very excited that he's here.
I mean, Mamnombine, I was listening to you sing and just how emotional you were as you were singing your father's lyrics. Talk to us about, was your family ever separated? Who stayed? who went to Zambia. What did that do to you as children? We often also don't talk about the children of parents who were involved in the struggle and what that does to them.
I think that's what I said. We're representing all those children who lost their parents, their fathers, their mothers. But the rest of the story, Marian can complete that, because I know of my father, we never 100% interacted. It was only, the olden days through letters and stuff like that, because he was far away in London and then in Zambia. But, he was our father.
So you were left behind, both of you?
No. Yeah. In 1960, our parents decided that they didn't want their children to be brought up under the then regime. And then because of King Kong, the success that it had in Johannesburg, it then traveled to the UK. And my parents decided to stay there to settle. So that's basically how, we became separated. Yeah.
And for other children who did not grow up in the same manner that you did, the history and how he's memorialized, how critical is that in a democratic South Africa where young people might not understand the extent of the sacrifices that people like your father made?
It's such a pity, I think we need to educate. This generation needs to be educated. It's not for me to say such men should be in our history books, but somewhere I think we should read. Most probably after all this, there will be an epitaph or whatever that will show where our heroes and heroines who fell outside the country were laid to rest. I think that would be very important because, I was telling my sister, my grandson yesterday, when I spoke about my father, he was Todd, the real Todd.
I think we should also remember that some of his songs, he not only wrote jazz, but he wrote songs in the indigenous tradition, choral music, very beautiful choral music. You may have heard of Ngcobo, Hamba Kahle.
Lakuchoni langa.
No, that's not his.
Is it? Okay.
And,
I thought it was his. Okay.
And also Makali Pile, which was written in the honor of Father Trevor Huddleston. So even though many of the younger children don't know his history, his music is there. It's played from time to time. It was Hamba Kahle was played at the funeral of Archbishop Desmond Tutu in Cape Town. So I think, his spirit lives.
And the importance of the arts. Sometimes we always talk about people who are in the bush physically fighting, but the arts also played a role in the liberation struggle, didn't it?
Yes, absolutely. As I said, he's known for articles on protest music in South Africa, very detailed, where he describes the fact that, people refused to be sat down, that they were fighting against the regime. So yes, the arts did play a role.
And, congratulations, I guess. Is that what we say in a moment like this? And that hopefully you'll get the closure that you need. Those are the daughters of Todd Matshikiza. Thank you as well. Just speaking about the life and legacy of their father, quite an emotional moment there, as you can imagine, being separated from your father, one of the daughters knowing of the father, the other growing up in London with them. So let me just also take you and show you where we are in terms of the process at this stage. You can see inside the hangar is where now the wheels that the coffins will be placed on are already set, and we are anticipating the arrival of the plane from Zimbabwe to arrive at around 3 o'clock, as we heard from the Defense Ministry. So the process that's been undertaken at this stage, we understand, is that the remains were fetched from Zambia first, and there was a process that was undertaken there to, of course, exhume and then have a final send-off from the Zambian government. Then the plane has now also then moved to Zimbabwe, where a similar entire, procession has taken place. And of course, then the big moment at around 3 o'clock when that plane finally lands here in South Africa at the Waterkloof Air Force Base. An emotional moment that we can anticipate there for the families after all these years. For instance, with the Matshikiza family, their father passed away in 1968. And then for about 2 hours then, we will have the doors behind me shut so that they can allow for the transfer of the remains into various coffins before being handed over to the families, and that big homecoming ceremony on Friday, which will include President Cyril Ramaphosa.
All right, Ziyanda and Ngcobo, a very touching and beautiful conversation there with the proud and very emotional daughters of pianist, composer and journalist Todd Matshikiza. As we're seeing, there's some more family members arriving at the Waterkloof Air Force Base, as well as some religious leaders who will be leading some of those proceedings. Thank you so much.